Welcome back, everyone, to another reaction video. Well, one of the things I've always really been fascinated with is the origin of languages and names and where countries get their names from, and do they call them the same thing in their country as we call them from other countries, which is what we call exonyms, which are names that are used for a country that don't exist within that country, things like that. So I saw that General Knowledge, a channel with now 887,000 subscribers, which means we can help push them a little further toward 1 million, which would be amazing. They have a video called "The Old Names of European Countries and Why They Changed." Thought that would be an interesting topic for today, so I'll put the link down in the description. You can check it out without my commentary. Check out General Knowledge if you like what you see. If you like their channel, please consider subscribing to them. Let's go ahead and dive into this one.
Every country has a name. Usually it is named after the region in which it is located, or the people that live there, or at least once lived there. But languages change and people move around, and because of that, the names of countries or regions do too. There are hundreds, if not thousands, of examples of this throughout the world, but in this video I want to focus on Europe and take a look at 6 or 7 regions/countries that used to be known by different names than the ones we know them by today, and understand why that changed.
But what's awesome is when you start looking into some of the country names, probably not the ones we're going to talk about today, is how many of their names go back to ancient times. It's really remarkable. Especially as an American, because for Americans, so much of our history is so new when compared to the history of places like Europe and Africa and Asia. It's just mind-boggling to think about a name like Belgium for a country that's less than 200 years old, about to celebrate its 200th anniversary, yet its name goes back to the time of Julius Caesar and even beyond. Really cool.
Now, before I tell you the 7 that we're going to look at, I need to preface it by explaining that they fit into different categories. Most countries that we have today are recent, and while they have long histories throughout which they had different names, the title of the video may be a little misleading in that regard. These aren't necessarily countries that existed continuously throughout all of history. And
you know, he says that about countries that are recent, even though Europe has deep history that goes back forever. Some of the countries are fairly recent. I mean, just in my lifetime, thinking about the changes to the map that have happened since I was a kid. I had a globe that had East and West Germany on it, and had Czechoslovakia on it, and had the Soviet Union on it, had Yugoslavia. I mean, these are just a handful of the countries that have changed just in my lifetime.
At one point thought, let's change our name. Those exist too, like Burma becoming Myanmar, or Dahomey becoming Benin. But in this video, we're focusing more on the historical predecessors of European countries in their same regions or on the regions themselves, and comparing their names to the names of the countries today.
And many of these countries consider themselves to be the descendants of those peoples or those nations.
So enough with this disclaimer. First, let's understand when Bohemia was used, what it meant, why it changed to Czechia, and in turn what Czechia means too. I'm going to use that format for all of these examples. The name Bohemia traces back to the Celtic tribe of the Boii, who inhabited the region during antiquity. The Romans adopted this name as Boiohaimum, meaning the home of the Boii.
So it goes right back to the Romans. And again, you see Celtics there. And usually when people hear the word Celtic, they think of like Ireland or the British Isles in general. You know, Celtic, the Celts were everywhere. And it was almost a catch-all name that could almost be used like barbarians was by the Romans. But it was many groups. And there were lots of different Celts, but that's too much to get into in this video.
Later, the name referred specifically to the western part of modern Czechia with the establishment of the Kingdom of Bohemia, a major kingdom in Central Europe during medieval times, taking an especially important role within the Holy Roman Empire. It also had a very cool lion, coat of arms, and a pretty cool flag too. Over the centuries, Bohemia, despite referring to the region and its original boy inhabitants, became associated with the Czech-speaking Slavic population, despite being influenced by German culture as well during that medieval period. Bohemia then became a part of the Habsburg and Austro-Hungarian Empire.
And this is important to note too, is that for most of history, the idea of your nation or your people wasn't tied to borders on a map. That's a much more recent invention for the most part. It was much more about common language, common culture, common religion, common government over you. And by government, it was typically the feudal system. And so it was a lord or a system of lords. So these were constantly changing depending on all of those things.
But they had also expanded their influence over the east, incorporating the regions of Moravia and Silesia, and so a more united identity began to exist between these three regions, uniting around the Czech nationality. The transition to Czechia is therefore rooted in the desire for a unified name representing all the historical lands of the Czech people.
And it's amazing that even as we break this down, because we were talking about, we had Czechoslovakia, which was now what is Czechia or the Czech Republic, and Slovakia. And before that, Czechoslovakia was all a part of, parts of it was part of Germany and part of Austria, the Austro-Hungarian Empire. And so you can break these down even further. Even Czechia has Bohemia and Moravia. And even within those regions, you have then further breakdowns.
Bohemia, Moravia, and Silesia. The term Czechia first appeared in Latin during the 16th century and became popular in scholarly and literary works by the 17th and 18th centuries.
Wow.
However, it wasn't widely adopted in English until the 19th century.
Yeah, that's a great point. If you look at even U.S. Census records, you look at people who were born in that region, you're not going to see those people claiming to be of Czech descent. They're very often going to say they were born in Bohemia.
After
or they
the
might say
collapse
Austria.
of Austria-Hungary, Czechoslovakia was born, uniting Bohemia, Moravia, Silesia, but also Slovakia. And so after the dissolution of Czechoslovakia in 1993, Czechia was reintroduced as a shorthand for the Czech Republic, which united the original three regions, although the name gained official recognition only in 2016 to harmonize with international naming conventions. And so what was once Bohemia became Czechia with the addition of Moravia and Silesia.
And I'm excited, going to be making my first visit there at the end of April. This weekend we are finalizing the group trip that's going to go to Berlin, Dresden, Prague, Bratislava, and Vienna. So last chance, like literally the day that this video comes out is pretty much your last day or two to sign up for that trip if you're interested.
And they chose this name due to the development over time of a united Czech nationality. Next, how Romania used to be called Dacia. They actually still have a car brand that uses this name and I think comes from Romania. Dacia refers to the land inhabited by the Dacians, so it's a similar origin to Bohemia. They were a Thracian tribe in present-day Romania and Moldova, mentioned by Herodotus and other ancient historians. Thracia or Thrace is actually an older place name. This area is now part of Turkey, Bulgaria, Greece. It's also named after the Thrace tribe. Herodotus is quoted as having written, "The Dacians are the most law-abiding and bravest of the Thracians. They believe they are immortal, forever living on the following sense. They think they do not die, and that the one who dies joins Zalmoxis, a divine being."
And this is one of the reasons that the Dacians, or the Dacians as he's pronouncing it, were so hard to conquer for the Romans. And one of the last great expansions of the Roman Empire then happens under Trajan, who finally conquers the Dacians. And Trajan's Column, that very famous landmark in ancient Rome, that you can still see today, and that Trajan was actually had his ashes interred at the bottom of, was to celebrate his victory over these people.
While Dacians may have believed in eternal life, the name for their region didn't last forever. The Romans conquered Dacia in the year 106 under Emperor Trajan, incorporating it into the Roman Empire.
And this is really kind of the extent of the Roman Empire, because when Trajan dies, and then you come to Hadrian. Hadrian's going to be the first one that's going to say, you know what, I think we've gone far enough, and we're even going to pull back a little bit to consolidate our gains. And that's when he builds Hadrian's Wall, and so it's under Trajan that you kind of get the real extent of the Roman Empire. Yeah, there's some other forays here and there.
Latin heavily influenced the region's culture and language during this time. It's why Romania has the name that it does today, and why its language is essentially a Romance and Latin language, differing from the other Slavic languages of the countries around it. The name Romania officially emerged during the 19th century as a symbol of unity and desire for independence during the National Awakening. They began using it in reference to their ancestors that had migrated there. It is said that the Romans massacred about 2/3 of the Dacians and replaced the population with their own migrants that came from Italy.
So really just another example of how many empires over time have come in and kind of wiped out the culture that existed there and replaced it with their own, which the Romans did regularly, while also absorbing what they could learn from those cultures. But for most of history, as you look back, it's not Romania. It's Wallachia and Transylvania and Moldova.
Almost replacing the region's entire population and thus justifying the future name change too. It became formalized with the unification of the principalities of Moldavia and Wallachia in 1859, and later with the inclusion of Transylvania after World War I.
Yeah, I guess Moldavia, you have Moldova, I think, is the independent part that's there on the right.
Then the path from Livonia to Latvia and Estonia. The name Livonia, again, originates from the Livs, a Finnic tribe that lived along the Gulf of Riga. It really seems to be a common element in the origin of these old place names, that they were named after a tribe that existed there, and then as that tribe moved away, or as the region became controlled by other entities that weren't as connected to the tribe, a name change became justified. During the medieval period, Livonia referred to the territories controlled by the Livonian Order, a branch of the Teutonic Knights, covering parts of modern Latvia and Estonia, who dedicated themselves to the Christianization and to the crusades that took place in Europe, attempting to conquer lands or convert the pagan people that lived there. Its formal name was actually Terra Mariana, which I guess we can also consider an old
the land of Mary,
name for
Maryland,
the region, named as Land of Lady Mary due to the religious nature of the Livonian Order.
So can we just call it Maryland then?
The transition to Latvia began around the 19th century, also at a time of a national awakening, when the people of what is today Latvia wanted to be independent once again. It derives from another tribe, the Latgalians.
Yeah, so again, you've got just little tiny groups. I mean, it's amazing how much uniqueness, I guess you would say, there is to these small areas like this. Remarkable.
They are one of the 4 Baltic tribes forming the modern Latvian people, along with the Curonians, Selonians, and Semigalians, chosen instead of these due to their prominence and higher influence when compared to the other 3. After World War I, the Republic of Latvia was established and broke away from the Russian Empire, and so this name was adopted instead of the old Livonia. Caledonia is, like I mentioned, a similar case for Scotland, but some key differences also exist. Caledonia was the Roman name for the land north of their province Britannia, corresponding to modern Scotland. The term likely derives from the Caledoni tribe and the Latin root Caledo, meaning hard or rocky, reflecting the rugged terrain. The shift to Scotland comes from another Latin term, Scotia, which interestingly was actually initially used to describe the Gaelic-speaking regions of Ireland.
What's always been remarkable to me about that is that you have Scotland getting its name from a group of people who came from what is today Ulster in Ireland, and then you have the reverse happening several hundred years ago when you have the Protestants going from Scotland and creating the Ulster Plantation, which is today Northern Ireland. So they kind of came back. So it's really kind of interesting to see how that all played out.
And later the Scots, who migrated to Caledonia. By the Middle Ages, Scotland was firmly established as the name of the Northern Kingdom. The etymological connection highlights the integration of Gaelic culture with those local traditions.
And there's such a strong identity of the people there because you have the Scotland, right? The land of the Scots. And then when you have kings, they're not the king of Scotland, they're the king of Scots. They're the king of the people. And the people's land is Scotland. It's cool.
And another interesting case is Ruthenia. At the start, I mentioned that a lot of people associate it with being the old name of Ukraine, but in reality, it's the old name for a specific region, which encompasses a lot of current countries. Ruthenia derives from Rus, the name for the medieval East Slavic state of the Kievan Rus. It was a term used to refer to the East Slavic and East Orthodox people of the Grand Duchy of Lithuania, the Kingdom of Poland, later the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth.
Look how much we have again here. We've got the Golden Horde, and we've got the Bulgars and the Volga and Novgorod and Smolensk and Kievan Rus, and just crazy.
Parts of Austria-Hungary, but mainly to the people that lived in what is now Ukraine and sometimes Belarus and also Russia. Historically, in a broader sense, the term was used to refer to all of the territories under the dominion of the Kievan Rus. And so here the argument comes in a little bit. Which state is the successor of the Kievan Rus?
The answer is yes.
Is it Ukraine? Is it Belarus? Is it Russia? I think saying that it's Russia is reasonably wrong. Of course, they have a common heritage, but...
Yeah, and anytime we try to fit things into neat categories like that, it just doesn't work, and we shouldn't really try. Oh, is it one or the other? Well, no, it's kind of neither, and it's kind of both. And that's okay. It doesn't have to fit into our box of, oh, there's this to this to this to this.
The Kievan Rus broke up after the Mongol invasion, and it's an historical fact that Russia evolved from the later Principality of Moscow further north. Whether or not Ukraine can claim a direct connection to the Kievan Rus is, I guess, debatable, but Kiev is the Ukrainian capital today,
right.
So either way, the name of Ruthenia was abandoned, and others like Belarus, Russia, and Ukraine were introduced. Another interesting one is Castile, which then became Spain. And while this may seem like a transition, like the ones that I mentioned at the start, from the homey to Benin, of a country that exists continuously and at one point changes its...
Now, really, Spain it's kind of like how you have England being formed out of Wessex and Northumbria and Mercia, and then it becomes England, and then England and Wales. And then you have a Scotland added to that, and it becomes Great Britain. And then you add Ireland, and it becomes the United Kingdom. Spain is just the merging of, Castile and Aragon, and So yes, they're each parts of what becomes the whole, but they're different.
It's a little more complicated than that. Castile refers to a medieval kingdom in the Iberian Peninsula, deriving its name from the Latin castella, meaning fortress, due to its numerous castles.
I mean, it's kind of awesome to have a name of your country basically be fortress.
It played a central role in the Reconquista and later in the unification of Spain, which is, I think, why we could maybe claim a direct change. The dynastic union of Castile and Aragon in 1469, when Ferdinand II wed Isabella I, would eventually lead to the formal creation of Spain as a single entity in 15...
What's interesting to me about this, and I don't know, maybe some of our Spanish viewers can clue me in, is there still a distinct identity between, say, Castile and Aragon? Because I see that in the United Kingdom, even though they likewise merged under one crown. Although in that case, it wasn't the monarchs marrying each other. You had that with the King of Spain and the Queen of England marrying, but they never had children. Because if they had had a son, for example, then that son could have inherited both. But Scotland and England definitely feel very distinct, even though they're under one government in the United Kingdom, and they're under one crown. Because the King of Scots became the King of England. It feels like Spain is very much unified, whereas England and Scotland still kind of have those differences.
1516, when their grandson Charles V assumed both thrones.
Nah, I don't see
and then the name became more widely used as time went on. The name Spain originates from the Latin Hispania, which the Romans used for the entire peninsula, including what is today Portugal. So the name Spain was always kind of around. It just became common to use it for the country at a specific point, leaving Castile behind. And finally, the region of Illyria, or as you may know it today, Croatia, although again the region encompassed other countries that also exist now under a different name. Illyria was the name given by the Greeks and Romans to the Western Balkans in general, inhabited by the Illyrian tribes. The Romans in fact established the province of Illyricum within their empire after their conquest in the 2nd century BC. The territory was then ruled by the Byzantines and the Ottomans, and the name Illyria only disappears from the historical record after the Ottoman expansion into the Balkans in around the 15th century. The name was actually revived by Napoleon for the Illyrian provinces that were incorporated into the French Empire.
It makes a lot of sense. Napoleon was all about all things Roman. He loved modeling his own empire after what the Romans did. So I'm not at all surprised that he was recalling some of those Roman names for these provinces.
1809 to 1813. And the kingdom of Illyria, which existed from 1816 to 1849, was a part of Austria until that year, after which it was not used in the reorganized territories of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. The transition to Croatia would go on to become Yugoslavia. By the 9th century, the region was already recognized as the Duchy of Croatia and later the Kingdom of Croatia, marking its distinct Slavic identity. And it is true that Illyria occupied other parts of the West Balkans, namely parts of Bosnia and Herzegovina, even Montenegro, parts of Albania, or...
And again, I mean, 30, 40 years ago, this was pretty much all one country. It was Yugoslavia, the South Slavs. Not all of this territory was a part of it, but a good chunk of it was.
Kosovo. So perhaps here we have a similar situation to Ruthenia. Illyria was the name of a region which encompassed a territory that now belongs to several different countries, but regardless of that fact, it is an old name that was used for a region, even a kingdom, and then was completely abandoned and replaced by other ones that we know today. So those are some of Europe's old country or region names and why they changed. Understanding why they were first implemented, what they meant, why they were used, and why they fell into disuse, with the people that lived there going away or new people coming in, making way for the country names or region names that we know today.
Yeah, and I mean, same thing. Some of the country names that do still exist, places like Germany, that was from Germania, which again was Roman. So really cool stuff. I'm fascinated by this sort of thing. And I would be curious to hear your thoughts on ones that we could add to this list. Maybe you live in a particular country that has a name that is different than the name it had a couple hundred years ago, and you could tell us in the comment section what that is and why. Let's all learn together. Thanks for watching.